Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. There's been an article on CBC News recently where they interviewed Adrian Monk, who's the spokesperson for the World Economic Forum. And he's basically saying that anyone who questions what's up with the World Economic Forum is a conspiracy theorist. But I think there are very serious and practical things that Canadians should be concerned about regarding the World Economic Forum, its influence on our policies, and some of the various trustees who are in influential positions in Canada. So I'd like to share my thoughts on that with you. You may not agree with all of them, you may not agree with any of them, but have a look and see what you think. So, World Economic Forum are climate misinformers, and I'll show you why. Here's the CBC article. World Economic Forum says Canada has bigger issues than conspiracy theories. That's true, and a lot of them were caused by people associated with the World Economic Forum. This is a bit about the forum. It was established in 1971, and it claims to have moral and intellectual integrity at the heart of everything it does, which is why it brought an angry teenager to berate the world rather than bringing actual scientists like the people from Clintel, the 1,200 scientists who state that there's no climate emergency and who invited the World Economic Forum to organize a constructive open meeting between world-class scientists on both sides of the debate. So the response to that was crickets. But the response to Greta and her presence there was world front page coverage, thanks in part to Mark Benioff, who is a World Economic Forum trustee and owner of Time, and he also started the 1 Trillion Tree Organization. And thanks to the 1 Trillion Tree Organization and Greta, Canadians are now on the hook for $6 billion for planting trees in one of the most treed countries of the world. Greta, of course, participated in U.S. Congress hearings on climate change, and at that time when asked about the science behind her comment, "I want you to panic," she said, "There's no science behind my statement," and the response from the World Economic Forum was crickets. She said, "Look, these are metaphors. Of course they don't literally mean that I want people to panic." Oh, really? Well, look at that. Thanks, World Economic Forum, because now we've got millions of people feeling suicidal, suffering eco-anxiety, and it's all about climate change. So in the course of the global COVID-19 pandemic, the World Economic Forum has become a popular target for conspiracy theorists. That's what the CBC story says, and I wonder why. Well, they published this little video stating that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Now, of course, they try to pass it off as just a Ida Auken's op-ed, but they published that video. They've been running it for about 4 or 5 years. So now they try and blame Ida Auken, a Danish MP, for her op-ed when they themselves had adopted it as part of their branded messaging. So that's their moral and intellectual integrity for you. And we do have bigger things to talk about than conspiracies, and that is related to our debt. For instance, here, our debt, our expenditures rose by 93% in 2 years during COVID, and our deficit rose from 5.6 billion to 312.4 billion, which is an increase of 5,479%. 5,479%. And guess who is helping us get there? Well, we have all kinds of people associated with the World Economic Forum. So first, our finance minister at the time was Bill Morneau. He also came up with this idea for the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which we have lots of questions about. And it looks like the federal government, with Morneau, tried to ram through this very expensive aid package during lockdowns. And they wanted to do one without limitation. But the Conservatives raised objections as to what they dubbed a liberal power grab. Wow, thank God somebody raised an objection. Now in January, Bill Morneau was promoting Canada at Davos, and by August 2020 he was out of a job, something to do with the We charity. And so Chrystia Freeland, former journalist and World Economic Forum trustee, was promoted to that position, and she had been Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. In this capacity, she led Canada's united response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And never fear, we also had another professional helping us, the unelected World Economic Forum trustee and UN-appointed climate czar, Mark Carney. So he's been advising the PM on the COVID-19 economic response. So this is why a lot of Canadians have questions about the World Economic Forum, because we're really in debt. And today, post-COVID, many Canadians do own nothing, and our kids will inherit this debt. So of course we have questions about the World Economic Forum, and that's not a conspiracy theory. Look at all this money. This is $1 trillion. 1.44 trillion. That's what we owe at the time that article was written. And Canadians are not alone. The current energy prices in Europe and the UK imply widespread poverty amongst households, a collapse in discretionary spending, utter ruin for many small, medium-sized enterprises, and a fair few larger firms too. Here's a little shop in Ireland, just to give you an example. Their electricity bill went to 9,836 euros, which is $12,000 Canadian. Doesn't look like they can sell enough cakes and tea to cover that, to me. And while all these little shops are being crushed during COVID, the FANG stocks like Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google rose by 180% between 2020 and mid-2021. Look at all these profits. Isn't that something? Meanwhile, small businesses, 21% closed, revenue for the rest down 30%. That was some time ago, so it's worse now. Now, of course, people will say, well, these are not only COVID things, these are due to the oil price shock. But here's the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report from 2006. Hydrocarbons drive the world economy. And they are saying that if there's an oil price spike, that would really unbalance the world economy, cause geopolitical shifts, economic disruption, and social unrest in oil-consuming countries. So they knew that then, and on the same page, they also knew that an influenza pandemic would be very devastating to the world economy. So there's the 2006 report. Here's the 2020 report. And look at this. Surprise! Here's oil price shock and pandemic in 2006, 2007. And over here into the 2020, it's all been replaced with climate change. And it's odd because you'd think that Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney, as Canadians, would be aware of the impact of SARS and BSE on the Canadian economy back in the early 2000s. You'd think that as trustees they might have advocated for keeping pandemic and oil price shock on the list of global risks, because Canada has always had a bit of a roller coaster with oil price shocks. And ironically, Canada knew there'd be more pandemics, and even likely the point of origin. So we have this pandemic plan from 2006. Lockdown does not appear in the plan, and historic evidence suggests that pandemics occur 3 to 4 times a century, and they usually originate in South Asia. Now here's an interesting development. Excuse me. On January 23, 2015, the World Economic Forum was granted host state status in Switzerland. That means it became kind of like the Red Cross with certain kinds of immunity. And in the CBC article, they say, oh, well, look, Stephen Harper went to Davos. Why are you guys so concerned about recent events? Well, when he was at Davos, he said the number one priority was prosperity, namely economic growth and the creation of jobs, and he also offered energy security to the world. Meanwhile, this World Economic Forum trustee and Canadian tells firms ignoring the climate crisis will go bankrupt. So he's actually threatening and intimidating fossil fuel firms, creating an energy crisis. So we have a huge financial problem in Canada right now, and we actually have 21 trillion US dollars gross value in resource riches, which works out to about 13 trillion net Canadian. But these two financial wizards who are World Economic Forum trustees don't seem to recognize that. And what are our World Economic Forum trustee financial wizards missing? With 13 trillion, you could give every Canadian $342,000. You could pay off our entire national debt 13 times. Well, maybe a bit less now, but 10 times. But still, we could pay it off. And the reason why we didn't suffer in 2008 like the rest of the world did is that even in the heart of the recession, the oil sands was spinning something on the order of 20 billion into the Canadian economy. And at that level, you'll have employment in Canada dependent on the order of about 450,000 people. The oil sands are key to the Canadian economy. And Don Thompson also said that it would impact our GDP to the tune of about $1.7 trillion. So the West has another kind of problem that's concerning about the World Economic Forum. People live too long, and that comes from the International Monetary Fund report. So OECD countries, this was from 2016, are facing 78 trillion in pension liabilities. That means pensions that are assigned, but there's no money to pay for them. So during lockdown, it was so bad that this very healthy 90-year-old woman decided to choose medically assisted death, medically assisted suicide, because she didn't want to go through another lockdown again. So it's clear that lockdowns kill people. So Canadians do have questions. And here, the World Economic Forum and OECD sign a strategic partnership framework in 2020. Meanwhile, at Davos, they love to entertain this depopulationist. Jane Goodall says all these environmental things we talk about wouldn't be a problem if there was the size of population on Earth that there was 500 years ago. The world population 500 years ago is estimated between 420 and 540 million people, or 6.7 billion fewer people than today. I don't know, having all the world's wealthiest, most influential people get together for a gab fest, meeting up with the depopulationists spouting things like that, when so many people in the climate community are depopulations to begin with, and then having the World Economic Forum making a strategic partnership with OECD countries, which have $78 trillion in pension liabilities. I don't know, and then this all culminates in a pandemic and an energy crisis that was seen as global risks by the World Economic Forum in 2006, but disappeared from their brochure in 2020. I don't know, raises lots of questions for me, but maybe I'm just a conspiracy theorist. Let's continue. So the UN Environment Program kicks off a new agreement, and they're working with the World Economic Forum. And as part of the World Economic Forum opinion posts, this fellow is fairly popular there. This is Johan Rockström of Sweden, now of the Potsdam Climate Institute in Germany. He thinks it would be easy to phase out fossil fuels. There's no excuse to do it, right? He says phase out of fossil fuels is the easy one. He also would like to have a $400 a ton carbon tax, a global carbon tax law for that. And he also believes that the rationale is simple. In the next 3 decades, the fourth industrial revolution, which is Klaus's big idea, driven by artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the Internet of Things, will transform everyone's lives. Well, you know what? Nobody asked for that. And just to put a little spin of reality on this, here's the World Economic Forum sending this report to their corporate participants, the Net Zero Challenge, fast forward to decisive climate action. When in fact, here is Professor Michael J. Kelly explaining about future energy needs and engineering reality that he says, I assert decarbonizing by 80% by 2050 is impossible without mass deaths. Now, interestingly enough, in 2019, in September, this was issued, the Exponential Roadmap. They wanted to cut emissions in half by 2030. That's why they have this cute little 2030 logo here in the corner. Right after that, the modern monetary theory economist Mariana Mazzucato wrote this op-ed saying we need to act boldly now if we're to avoid economy-wide lockdowns to halt climate change. And then the UNEP issued this one saying cut global emissions by 7.6% every year for the next decade to meet the 1.5 degrees C Paris target. And voila, when lockdowns happened, who rejoiced? The World Economic Forum rejoiced, and they thought, wow, look, this is fantastic. CO2 emissions fell by 17% in early April 2020 compared with 2019. And they want to do more lockdowns. They think it's fantastic. Look, they even said lockdowns are quietly improving cities around the world. They said that. They actually said that when people's lives were being destroyed, when people were committing suicide, people were going bankrupt, when cities were gutted, empty, dystopian places with no life, no vibrant street life, no music, no clubs, no pubs, no fun, no people all locked indoors. And the World Economic Forum said that lockdowns were quietly improving cities, while people were dying of fentanyl overdoses, while children were committing suicide, while people were suffering from lack of medical care. The World Economic Forum actually thought that cities were being improved by lockdowns, and they want to do more. So yeah, Canadians have some questions. I don't think that's conspiratorial, do you? And in fact, although they rejoiced over here, they're probably not very good at understanding the fluctuation of CO2 concentration in the air, because the entire year of lockdowns or so is only expected to reduce the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere by 12 hundredths parts per million. But the annual actual natural fluctuation is 0.5 to 1 parts per million, or 5/10 to 1 parts per million. So it was actually useless. This was a useless experiment. This will not stop climate change. It won't reduce carbon dioxide, and it will kill a lot of people. So lockdowns will nudge you into a new low carbon, no fun, no freedom digital gulag. See, the lockdown period in many countries may be long enough to establish new lasting routines if supported by longer term measures. In planning the recovery from COVID-19, governments have an opportunity to catalyze low carbon lifestyle changes by disrupting entrenched practices. So like disrupting entrenched practices, like say going to the doctor. Instead, you'll have to do it by Zoom from now on. Going to class. Instead, you'll have to do it by Zoom from now on. Or say going to a hockey game. Well, instead, you'll just have to watch it at home and see all those seats covered with that crazy screening material that they put and all the fake crowd noises in the background. And going to the pub. Imagine going to the pub and drinking a beer that has CO2 in it and having fun. That's part of the lifestyle change that they hope that governments will incorporate, so that you'll have a low carbon lifestyle and you'll have to walk everywhere or ride your bike. So we have lots of questions about the kinds of influences that we're getting from the climateers, most of whom are associated with the World Economic Forum. Here's another example from Klaus's book, The Great Reset. He's very ecstatic that Zoom has skyrocketed to 70 billion in market capitalization, which is higher than any US airline. Well, look at that. Zoom employs maybe 2,500 people. Airlines employ thousands of people, and they have a spin-off supply chain of thousands of people, and they feed the tourism and recreation industry of hundreds of thousands of people. And so Klaus is rejoicing that somebody who can run a computer program effectively that allows, or a platform that allows people to speak to each other virtually, that somehow this is better than airlines where people actually get to meet face to face, hug a loved one, hold their hand as they're dying, pick them up as they're being born and hug them, go to a beach in a sunny place and supply the entire GDP of a tiny country with tours and bucks. I don't know, Klaus thinks that somehow a virtual experience outweighs all of that. So we got lots of questions about the World Economic Forum because, you know, all the people, all those thousands of people who work at US airlines, they spend their money and they buy things. They buy houses, they buy cars, they need to get their hair cut, they need to get their nails done, they need tools to work in their yard. And so that 2,500 people who work at Zoom will not be supporting the global economy, but the thousands of people who work at airlines will be. And interestingly enough, lockdowns artificially created the perfect greenhouse for the fourth industrial revolution. So you see, the fintech sector, for instance, it was kind of a dog before lockdowns. But once lockdowns hit, this is a financial technical sector. This is like things like Stripe and other kinds of payment. So they went from sort of nothing to boom, 88 billion investment in 2,528 deals in 2021. So that's great, but it didn't happen naturally. It happened because of an artificial lockdown. And in fact, lockdowns were never recommended, not even by bioterror experts. And this is from 2006. This gentleman is deemed to be one of the doctors who helped eradicate smallpox. But they note in their article that the consequences of lockdowns would be so devastating that it shouldn't be recommended. So yeah, people have lots of questions about the World Economic Forum. Because today, post-COVID, many Canadians own nothing, and our kids will inherit this debt. So yeah, of course, we have lots of questions. And our interest-bearing debt
rose from 1.02 trillion
to 1.44 trillion. And a 1% increase in interest rates would add $14.4 billion to the annual federal debt servicing charges. So the World Economic Forum also claims to be neutral. So Monk said that the WEF does not prescribe policy, but rather acts as a forum for exchanging ideas. We're not an advocate on behalf of any particular political point of view. We try and remain impartial and neutral. So they're full on behind Ukraine. And it's a tragedy that Ukraine has been invaded. But this is definitely not neutral, is it? They are promoting a global price on carbon. And ironically, Russia has never ever bought into climate hysteria. In fact, Russia sees climate action as an assault on economic growth, environment, public safety, science, and human civilization itself. So isn't that funny that the World Economic Forum thinks the exact opposite, and yet all these climate policies are destroying the Western world? So Canadians have questions. We have questions about the $6 billion tree planting fiasco. That would be, a lot of money out of your pocket when it's only 30 cents to plant a tree for a seedling for forestry companies and 30 cents to maintain it. So where's the rest of all the money going? We've got lots of questions about the debt that piled up overnight, especially when there weren't very good parliamentary processes to approve it. We have questions about why the World Economic Forum would promote a teenager who actually was unvetted and had no science behind her scary comments, but won't meet with Clintel, which includes 1,200 scientists. It's now up to 1,200 scientists and scholars from around the world. And we have questions about World Economic Forum trustees advising our government on COVID-19, creating this long-term lockdown, which has now led to many people dying, many people missing their treatments, many people going hungry, many people dying of opioid overdoses, and many people who will suffer from unattended medical issues. So lockdowns kill people, and we want to know why this happened. And ironically, in the statutes of the World Economic Forum, they say the forum always acts in the spirit of entrepreneurship in the global public interest, combining the forces of creative thinking, innovative initiatives, and intellectual integrity with the will to advance peace and prosperity in the world. Well, that's what they say. So this is the new normal that we expect. We expect what John Diefenbaker said years ago. This is how Canada used to be. I'm a Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to worship in my own way, free to stand for what I think is right, free to oppose what I believe wrong. or free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and all mankind. And to wrap up, I'd like to invite you to look at our annual event, our 17th annual event. We have 2 video presentations, one by Donna Laframboise, which deals exactly with what I have been talking about, how climate activism is undermining free speech, free thought, and free choice. And also by Dr. Roy Spencer, The Most Important Reasons Why There's No Climate Emergency. Both of these videos will show you that the World Economic Forum is snowing you. They're not acting with moral or intellectual integrity. They're climate dogmatists. They're working in a manner that coordinates very influential people and organizations in the world. We've seen the results. The results are deadly. So it's time that we get off the climate dogma bandwagon. And it's probably time that we have some kind of an inquiry in Canada into the impacts of the COVID lockdown and the influences of the World Economic Forum on Canadian public policy. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.